Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Transcription services provided by transcribeme.com. Episode 540. Feel the Love. Monday, April 15th, 2019. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norp. Thanks for joining us. News is that Google is seriously considering joining Apple in eliminating cookies in their web browser, throwing a large portion of the programmatic ad space into doubt. What does digital advertising look like without cookies? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, why product reviews are becoming even more important. HIPAA-compliant voice skills raising questions. What to do about VR. Plus this week's Advil 5. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the author of the new book, Built to Suck, and co-founder of the HMS Beagle, the Admiral himself, Mr. Joseph Jaffe. Hi, Joe. What's going on?
Well, what is going on? We've got the premiere of Game of Thrones tonight. Tiger Woods won the Masters. Life is good.
Well, life is good for Tiger Woods and the Game of Thrones cast, but I'm not so sure about the rest of us. Now, also with us, we welcome back the president and chief creative officer of Allscope, as well as board member at Mashburn Enterprises, Mr. Jonathan Sackett. Jonathan, hi.
Well, I don't have as good of a process here as Joe does, but let me tell you guys. Here's what's going on in Chicago: Smollett and R. Kelly.
So life is bad.
Life is bad here in Chicago.
Life is bad in Chicago these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
And finally, we have the VP Group Director Digital at MKTG on the show for the first time, Mr. Keith Stoeckler. Keith, well, hi, welcome.
Hey, Bob, appreciate it. Yeah, it's been one of those long-time listener, first-time caller situations, but absolutely pleased to be on.
Yeah, so pleased that someone brought you to my attention. I really, really enjoyed meeting you. Well, let's get into the topics right now and kind of put these brains to work. It's looking more and more likely that Google will start blocking cookie data in the Chrome browser, joining Apple, who already blocks cookies in their Safari browser. Now, having said that, Google will still allow cookies for their own ads, which is kind of suspect, but that's beside the point. We've already talked about that thing. But what this means for advertisers they're seriously looking at a web future that is devoid of a widespread tracking mechanism to power their programmatic engines. So the whole programmatic ad space could go bye-bye. Jonathan, does this spell the end of the programmatic space as an effective tool, or are there workarounds? What's your take on this situation, this news by Google?
You know, I'd rather have Joe take this one if that's okay with everybody. No, I'm kidding. I'm sorry, that's a pre-show joke. But anyway, you know
Legendary.
Thank you. It's only between us though, so I don't think anybody else is going to get it. But anyway, I've got a lot of thoughts on this. I remember my first job in advertising was for a digital-centric agency. And, cookies were always a part of everything we did because you have to watch, learn, grow, traject, whatever. And I think what we're going to see here is a couple of things. You're going to see a short-term hit for a long-term benefit, meaning the watchdog or the eye in the sky is never going to go away in any digital platforms. Now, I would also say that if they were going to do this, it should have been done already. Okay, because if you look at what Safari did, they were stripping that out 3 years ago, something like that. So I think what's happening is you're going to see I always bring up the race between the bullet and the bulletproof vest, right? One gets better, then the other gets better. They're late to the game to do this. I hope we don't see a European cookie law, which basically litters the websites with meaningless notices about cookies, right? But what you're going to see is workarounds. A lot of these smaller companies are going to take a hit, particularly if they're around programmatic, if their only data is based on programmatic. So what you're going to see is alternatives to tracking, e-tags, local storage, fingerprinting, server-side things. Respawning is what they're calling the category. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to see the short-term hit, but there's still going to be workarounds. But those companies that are hanging their hat on cookie data are going to get crushed.
Well, are workarounds even worth it? I mean, Keith, what's your opinion? Because it's just like you got this situation where the ad space is being remade. Yes, there's still going to be cookie and there's still going to be programmatic through Google because Google is going to have this verified ad space where they don't have a lot of trash going on, supposedly. But for the rest of the world, it's just like it's this chance to reset, right? And have more useful metrics that are not invasive on the customer, right?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly could be. I think, hopefully we could all agree that I think very few entities make good use of the data that they have.
Absolutely.
So, losing these third-party cookies is not really a kill shot. And my hope would be, we may lose the ability to follow someone across the internet, but that's okay. And it should be okay for us. I think, work harder to put out work that really answers an insight or a truth and make work that cuts through and people stop scrolling to see. So tracking someone across the internet is not a direct correlation to making strong work.
No, I agree. I think that's a really good point. I would just add to that what this is going to do, hopefully, right, on behalf of the companies that need this data, they're going to have to focus on first party versus third party. So for me, I'd rather see quality content versus inferred context.
But first-party data doesn't really cover the actions of the individual online. It covers a certain number of actions, transactional interactions, those types of things, sentiment, but it doesn't really do the same thing as cookies. And, I'm wondering whether or not that's enough. I mean, Joe, I know this isn't your wheelhouse, but what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think Jonathan kind of said it best earlier, which is this idea of let's not let the Europeans get involved, because when they do, it pretty much goes to hell in a handbasket for all of us. and actually, this isn't a slight on the Europeans. It's just that ultimately they've been much better at organizing and regulating, and everyone in the US ends up playing a really, really bad game of catch up. And it kind of all serves us right for, whether we're talking about social media or the promise of digital. The fact is we've really gotten it so wrong for so long, and really failed to invent and inspire and lead from the front, right? Take the high road. And now we're kind of continuously playing catch up. And the one thing I did read in the source article is that, in this shakeup, right, there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers, and it's I guess in the early days of digital, we called it the Wild West. This just sounds more like kind of one of the rings of Dante's Inferno.
It sounds like a OK Corral shootout is going on, and we're just going to find out who wins in the end. But
it's all just versions of chaos, right? There's some big winners and there's some big losers, and some people are dumb lucky, and others are kind of losing and winning at the same time. But it is, I guess there is an inevitability of kind of, in a cycle of growing up and maturation and figuring out what comes next. And that's what's happening.
Yeah. And it's going to evolve just like it always has. I mean, I remember, all data is not created equal. And I know we all agree on that. But one of the things I remember, do you guys remember back when you used to get web trends reports that would measure hits?
Yes.
And the thing about it is that to our clients and our partners, they would think a hit equals a visit, and it didn't. A hit was tracked by the amount of graphic content on a per page basis. So for example, the average homepage would measure as 14 to 20 hits, but that's not a visit. So the point is you making sense of the data that you already have, corralling it so that you can control it and understanding it. So, I mean, cookie data isn't perfect either. If you're just trying to measure a session, well, clearly, if you just minimize your browser, you're still in that session.
But I will point out that cookie data is about intent, and intent is not something that you can get from just anywhere. The actions that we take online, they matter. And in this article, it kind of floated the idea. One of the articles that I had clipped for this week, it floated the idea that context could take the place of the cookie. That context is the new focus of the internet and where we need to be. And context tells you where the person is and what they're thinking, but it doesn't really tell you the intent that they have about whether or not to buy. And I'm wondering, is context a suitable and adequate replacement for intent when it comes to targeting? I mean, Keith, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's what it should be headed. And that's really when we have to figure out what the data is telling us. I think the data could tell us whatever it needs to tell us, but when you can start to have an inferred idea of what a user's intent was and the context around it, to your point, then yeah, that's what we should be focused on, versus the litany of what I can get if I'm tracking you around the internet.
Yeah, that's right. I think if you think of it in terms of, okay, HTTP is the railroad tracks that everything is built upon, right? So the different cars are running on different tracks. If you take a look at that and you say, okay, how are we tracking this and what's a better way to do it? If you look at the intent of what respawning is supposed to do, it's supposed to create a better form of intent. Now, is it going to? Can it? Or because you can't right now, the platform is HTTP and you can't change that. Now, Bob, to your other point, I would say the thing is that there's more activity happening these days, on downloadables and apps and things like that. I think, that's why I mentioned that I thought we were being late to the game as far as governance goes, because I think a lot of this is going to be a little bit of a misnomer. You still want to collect that data, but frankly, triggering communications and even email and apps, that's not going to really affect that.
And that brings up the other question that I had, which is, does any of this really matter in the end? I mean, we've got the rise of walled gardens, we've got app ecosystems, we've got all kinds of subsections of the internet where things are going on, and where being a part of that group is the data center for that group, and you get this incredible information, but it is a walled garden. And I'm wondering, does it matter that cookies are going away, considering that the internet keeps slicing and dicing itself into smaller and smaller groups?
Yeah, my vote on that is, I think it's not going to matter for the short term, but for the longer term, as long as we're building an expandable quality watchdog system, and I hate to call it that. I think eye in the sky is probably safer, but an eye in the sky system that's going to watch intent, behavior, and an opt-in sequence, so that a hypertext transfer protocol can be extended to a downloadable app or whatever, so that you can see what people really want when they're setting their own preferences. That's why I think it's going to move more towards first-party data, I hope.
Is there a problem with moving entirely toward a world where we have to rely on first-party data? I mean, Keith, Joe, any thoughts on that? You've got this situation where you're relying entirely not upon what's going on your website, meaning what people are doing on your website, tracking where they're on the internet, etc. You're relying entirely upon one source of data. Is that a problem, or is that just the only problem being that it's going to cost you money now?
Hey, Joe, would you start your answer again with Jonathan is right?
Jonathan is always right.
I love that guy.
However, no.
Okay.
So I would say I don't think it's a bad thing at all. And I actually think that what we're witnessing in a way is almost a realization of, this idea of, something that is very, very near and dear to my heart, which is all about retention and about us focusing on and being a lot more customer centric. And a lot more focused on what really counts. And so,
in other words, more on loyalty and advocacy and less on acquisition.
Yeah, but also if you look at the whole DTC rise, right? I mean, that is all about profiles and data and first party, first party data and information, right? And so, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I mean, I think this is absolutely a wake-up call to an advertising comms-based and, quite frankly, lazy ecosystem. And so, in a way, it's kind of just dessert. So no, I don't think it's a bad thing at all. But what I will say, to add, and I don't know if I'll throw it back to Jonathan because he's always right, is. Or Keith, because I've just met him and he seems to be always right too. But
I like him too. Yeah.
But
I'm glad we all love each other. Now let's get back to the conversation.
Let's get back to the subject. We love each other.
It's a love fest. No, but there is, and I think it's important to level set and recognize that you have these, 800-pound gorillas in the space that have become really 8,000-pound gorillas, and that are operating their own ecosystems and their own walled gardens. And so you've got these mighty kingdoms or empires within, and then you've got publishers and you've got players out there that are specialized or just smaller players that are really struggling to compete. So there is a whole kind of rebalancing of power. It is kind of like a Game of Thrones like situation. And the real question is, who's going to kind of emerge, who will take the throne at the end of the day when we start to see
that's more, that's more apt than you may even realize, because we've been talking on the show for the past couple of weeks about 5G and about the understanding that when 5G comes out, when the rollout happens, suddenly all data from that one source, from that one customer, I mean, we're talking about location data, activity on the web. Everything is going to be tracked by the carrier because it's one connection no matter where you go. It's no longer hitting Wi-Fi or going off and doing cell service when you're away and doing your home internet when you're at home. It's one connected experience throughout the entire day if it works the way it's supposed to. And that gives the carriers incredible control over what is going on the internet. I mean, they know everything, and it makes publisher data even less useful to us because we can go to the carrier, but it becomes a bottleneck as well. There's a lot of influence. I mean, Keith, does that scare you in any way?
The way you said it does, but I don't know if we should be scared. I was thinking about mobile when you were bringing up 5G and the fact that we have all this data as a mobile device user, yet very few use it in the right ways. And I don't think we've even experienced what mobile tracking can really be as far as being a positive to a consumer. So I welcome it. I think certainly the way you said it is scary, but I don't think we should be scared. And I think we've done enough, as both of you guys have mentioned over the course of the last couple of years, that this is welcome. This is exactly what we've deserved. We're reaping what we sow.
We wanted it. We wanted Facebook as well, though, and it's that's my only concern, because you're right that the 5G promise is so amazing. We're overlooking the reality that AT&T now controls the data, and do we really trust AT&T any more than we trust Facebook or Google with our data? I mean, there's still concerns over that, and we need to be watchful over it as it goes forward. Well, I want to move on. I want to talk next about anyone who sells online already knows the importance of product reviews. However, even the most experienced of us might be surprised to learn that among Gen Zers, 27% say they always leave a product review after purchase, and 37% say that they do so most of the time. Keith, what is the impact of these numbers, and what does it mean for online sellers? What are your thoughts?
So Gen Z is not doing things the way others have in the past, and we're surprised. Gen Z is not leaving reviews. Is that a cause for alarm? And I think reviews are happening. They're just not necessarily happening on the same platforms of purchase, like a Yelp or a Google review or an Amazon review might be. And so I think reviews are still very important, and that's not going to change. But the behavior in which people leave these reviews seems to be changing, and that's okay, as we've seen in many other aspects of how Gen Z engages with brands and products. And hey,
no,
let's just drop.
Am I right in understanding the way you're talking about this? Because it's just like the way I read it. I mean, it's just like I thought 27% and 37% was high for a review rate, and I thought that this is actually a trend that shows that Gen Zers are actively leaving reviews at a higher rate, and this is something that we need to worry about even more in the future, because as they grow into adults, they're still going to be doing this.
No, I mean maybe I was reading it that they're leaving reviews elsewhere. If I think about Instagram and how that platform has really grown into a strong e-commerce presence, reviews are basically Instagram comments, and that's how they're seeing what their friends are doing and what they're into. I know not incredibly hitting on Gen Z, but Nextdoor, the app, the platform, that in younger communities or younger users, they're sharing recommendations and reviews there. So I think the number, to your point, is pretty good. I also think it could be a lot better if we think about, your question was, if I'm selling something online, what do I think about this? I think the number should be higher. And are we going to see less and less?
Yeah, the number should always be higher. We should always be looking for it. But, right now it seems like retailers and product sellers are trying to pull teeth to get people to leave reviews. I mean, Joe.
Well, I'm sorry. Can I just interject real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think, Keith, first of all, be careful. You don't want to hurt the Gen Z's feelings, okay?
Well, let's get that out of the way.
Let's get that out of the way. Keith means no harm. But I would say the thing is, it's ironically, you guys are both right, because the way that the statistics that I've seen recently, I think the 27% is a high number, but that's for the word always. They always put it out there. If you comparative to other statistics that I've seen, it's the average other categories of Gen X, et cetera. They're coming across and saying usually and things like that. All for an always number, 27% is high.
Yeah, and if that's the case, what does that do to online strategy and online selling? I mean, it's just like, if we know that we're selling to a group that is largely going to always leave a review, how does that change the way we go online and sell? I mean, Joe, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I feel I know you were starting to ask me something, and but I don't know what it was. But here's my answer.
The answer is yes.
I don't know what you were asking me, but here I am. I'm going to talk to you anyway.
Before Jonathan rudely interrupted you, with no doubt something where he was right.
There you go.
So I think the number's high as well. I think the number's really high. I mean, I think that there is one of the biggest challenges we've always had as marketers, and certainly in this world now, is apathy, right? As I often say, kind of, love and hate are the same, and we can deal with them both. In this case, the article as well on the topic was really kind of understanding how people react to those reviews, the reviews that say you're awesome versus the reviews that say you suck. But it's all the people that don't leave reviews that really we should be worried about. And I think, if it can be said about millennials and Gen Zers about them being apathetic, or not as activists, this is kind of proving that wrong, right? It's saying that they are going out and letting you know. I mean, remember, this is a generation now growing up and operating at work where Glassdoor is kind of the norm in a sense. So, there is a super transparency that exists now, and companies that aren't able to adapt or interpret that or be able to do something about it are in big trouble.
At the same time that this article came out and had me thinking about product reviews, another article by Jay Baer came out this week, and he wrote that brands often overreact to customer feedback. And I'm wondering, Keith, is he right? And if so, how does this trend possibly affect marketing strategies going forward? I mean, this idea that if brands are overreacting to feedback from customers, does an increased number of reviews help or hurt us, considering we don't know what to do with them?
Yeah, I think the importance is you have to be able to, as a brand, separate what's a legitimate issue and what is somebody just being whiny looking for free something. And I think that's the same case on social. So, but inevitably with a generation that's grown up with social and knows no other way but to just broadcast their feelings, I don't really necessarily think you could overreact to consumer feedback. I think when someone complains on social or in a review setting and their network sees it, and then inevitably a portion of that becomes invested in knowing the outcome, as a brand, you have to make sure you take that as a priority. So I'm not sure you could overreact to it.
Yeah, and I think, to Keith, to your point, you remember, are you dealing with a vocal minority or a silent majority? So, you talked about vetting that, and I think you're absolutely right. Now, the other thing is, anybody who's listening to this show that has heard me on this before, they can look me up, they can see who I've worked with, and I will tell you this, because of the companies that I've worked with, I've met with many potential partners, and seeding a lot of those comments, even when it says click a box to prove that you're not a bot, those seeding companies have learned how to plant those things, good and bad reviews, outside of the bot click. So what are you really reading, and how are you reading into it, and how are you going to react to it? What's worth reacting to? That is the most difficult part of dealing with that sort of data.
So I hear a lot of theory about how to work with this. What's your advice to retailers out there, for product sellers? How should they handle reviews going forward? Is it something that they should just continue to work with the way they always have, or is there some kind of new strategy that you might suggest to them?
Well, I think that it's funny because we always, back in the day, and I'm talking like 5 years ago, I don't know, 10 years ago, we kind of, all the consultants and the strategists in this space were really pushing and encouraging very strongly brands to be able to allow reviews on their site and open it up. Because it was a sign of life, it was proof of life, and it demonstrated engagement, and it certainly provides a public service. If you are an aggregator, right? If you are a retailer, if you're a Walmart or an Amazon, fantastic. It's what powers the whole ecosystem. If you're an individual brand or manufacturer, you have no choice ultimately but to go with it. But for the direct to consumer manufacturers, providing their own e-commerce solution, now it's a be careful what you wish for, because that wish has come true. Now, you're not going to be able to respond to each and every one, but I guess if you're asking for advice, well, my advice would be, don't overreact to the bad ones. Treat the good ones as equally as you would the bad ones, and potentially look towards these reviews as a source of closing the loop of R&D and as an innovation engine. If you're paying attention, and ultimately if you're not just looking at reviews as a numbers game, 3.5, 4.2, 82%, if you get beyond that and actually look for the insights, this could very well become the new market research.
And I think to that point, Joe, what we've got to do is, I think strategically, you use that information and that data as part of a bigger picture, number one. Number two, and tactically, you find those ways of, right now, the only thing to stop the crawlers and the bots and the seeding engines out there is, you guys have all seen the security measure where it says, how many stoplights do you see? And you go through the grid and you click all the stoplights you see. That right now is the only way to stop a seeding engine from seeding on those sites, but I guarantee you they're going to work around that quickly. So in the short term, you implement a strategy, you implement a tactic like that, you move towards a strategy of holistic to say, look, this is how we're gathering data, this is how we're gathering more data, and this is how we're proving that it's real people doing it, not just the employees of my store.
Yeah, I think we can't ultimately be so beholden on the Amazons and everywhere else where we're selling, is figure out some owned channels and ways of selling what you are putting into the market, and that you can hopefully control a little bit. And ultimately, I think that Black Mirror episode where everyone has a rating, I think that's coming sooner than we think. And why else are we all consumed with our Uber rating? Or maybe that's just me, but I think it's coming.
Yeah, and you know what? Make a better product.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just want to, it's funny because I'm going to try and be very careful this time so that I don't get lambasted by my fellow panelists about a book that I may or may not have written. But I will.
You have a book?
Oh my God! I'm getting
up.
I'm getting off right now.
No, but I'm going to give you some context that's not about the book itself, but more just about reviews in context. and this is not about the current one. When I wrote Flip the Funnel, I was trying to, I did an experiment which was kind of a little bit vulnerable and a little transparent, maybe too much so. But I actually said to people, I don't want you to give me a 5-star review. I'd rather I would love a 5-star review that is meaningful, but I would prefer a 4-star review that was meaningful to a 5-star review that was meaningless or was empty. The problem is that people reading the reviews are not necessarily, thinking and going through that same considered thought process. And so it is a double-edged sword, because ultimately the meaningful considered, even a meaningful considered 1-star review could in fact be more valuable. But people are, just like marketers and manufacturers are lazy. Guess what? Surprise, surprise. So are consumers lazy as well. And so it really is, what we do need in the industry is more filters and more layers of context. One thing Amazon has is Amazon does at least ask the question, was this review helpful to you? And so what they are trying to do, this is almost a search ecosystem developing, or a new ecosystem or taxonomy, I should say, where suddenly you'll say, here was the most helpful 5-star review, here was the most helpful 1-star review. And so different reviews take on different meanings and different ratings. Now, as an author, I encourage each and every single person that reads my book to review. In fact, the best thing that I can ask them, the most valuable thing ultimately for me, is for them to leave a review on Amazon. And so, whether it's the devil you know or the devil you don't, whether you like it or not, this is the new currency, and we have to run with it.
Okay, to everyone listening, please give Joe a 5-star review. Thank you.
Meaningful.
a meaningful
Here's what I've
5-star
learned now.
review.
I'd rather a 5-star meaningless review than I'm getting no.
Yeah, I learned that too.
Well, moving on, healthcare companies are starting to roll out the first HIPAA-compliant, and that's Health Information Portability and Accountability Act. I got it right. HIPAA-compliant voice skills to help consumers order prescriptions, book doctor visits, all kinds of things that previously they weren't able to do via these voice devices. But their focus on privacy and data protection in order to make this happen is only serving to highlight just how unsafe the majority of voice platforms are. So, Jonathan, is voice intrinsically flawed in terms of data protection? I mean, even the HIPAA stuff was being questioned for whether or not it really could protect us, considering that the more devices are connected to a voice device, the more opportunities there are to hack the data.
That's very true. So, okay, over the years, I've worked with GSK, Merck, Pfizer, J&J. So I've had to be around the HIPAA compliance a lot, and frequently. So here's the deal. Once again, you've got a governing body that doesn't understand the technology. Okay, so listen, the convenience of voice is outstanding, and I've said this before on the show to you, Bob. I think it's the next pioneering move. I think voice is going to control a heck of a lot more. Now, unfortunately, the technology and the platforms that voice resides on is so far ahead of any governance that they would have to grandfather it in. And frankly, the people at HIPAA, or the people that are making these norms, folkways, and laws, if you will, they aren't on top of the technology at all. So frankly, voice is going to outrun any governance that anybody tries to inflict on it.
And that's scary, right? I mean, it's like we're talking about HIPAA alone. HIPAA alone has all these potential security flaws. These HIPAA apps, they're not really as HIPAA compliant as we would like to think that they are. But that's not even touching all the other apps that don't even have to deal with HIPAA regulations or restrictions, who are putting out apps that are just willy-nilly taking our data without any understanding by the consumer about what's actually being accessed.
That's absolutely right. And
am I a guy with a tinfoil hat on tonight or something? I don't know what's going on with me.
I don't know. I can't see you.
I don't know. Why don't you activate your webcam?
Yeah, let's all see Bob.
As if my webcam isn't already activated. I'm sure it is somewhere.
Exactly. Isn't that the point?
Yeah, these are guidelines that are going to be a little bit too little and a little bit too late for the technology that's being pioneered. Now, should we be scared? Absolutely, because once you, because right now, let's face it, if you guys seen some of these virtual reality things that right now, Ronnie James Dio, for example, with his hologram is on tour and he's dead. So we can imitate voice very, very easily. We're getting robot calls these days. You can imitate and you can imitate anything visual, anything audio, anything period, and think of the type of data that you could get into if somebody knows what the heck they're doing. Now, voice isn't that in command right now. People aren't using it that often, but it's coming. Now, if we don't get guidelines, if we don't get laws in place prior to it becoming the mainstream, there's going to be a world of trouble out there. You think the hack job on Target servers was bad? Wait until the robot can imitate your voice.
Keith, I need you on this. Give us a little bit of perspective, would you?
No, I mean you're all right, and I do think we should be a little freaked out by it. I mean, I myself spent 2 years at an ad agency in healthcare and pharma as well, and I guess I'm just thinking about the prospects of what this can be. No doubt it is scary. No doubt we have to get regulations, but voice certainly is a way to get people to take their medication and be a lot healthier. I think we have to be a little bit more proactive in, these systems need to understand where you are on a 60-day refill prescription and prompt you, and then your voice accepts it, and that's outstanding. But yeah, a lot of this stuff could be dangerous with the amount of information we're providing it. But I think we have to start at a place where we're confirming prescriptions and we're doing small things, and hopefully, that'll bring more people into it and will allow, some of the structure to take shape the way it certainly should.
Well, yeah, and I mean, let's face it, it's always going to be a continuum or a balance between convenience and legality. And I think with what these guys are trying to do, if you guys dig deep enough into the HIPAA stuff, these guidelines and recommendations are almost always outdated. So the technology can turn on a dime. HIPAA and humankind can't.
I just feel like I ought to caveat this conversation because I know Emily Binder is probably coming out of her seat listening right now, just about to go down my throat for not standing up for voice. But I actually believe that voice is really good. It's a really great interface. It's how we're going to interface with computers for the rest of our lives coming up.
I'd like to go on record for saying I love Emily Binder and I love voice. So if you're alienating her, Bob, then you've got problems with all of us.
Well, I'll defend voice, and I'll defend Emily as well. Which is, it's so funny with it. There is COPA, there is HIPAA, there is, obviously all the privacy regulations. It's never a good thing to have. Regulation is the enemy of innovation, and ultimately, when we look at we're looking at these paradigms and these frameworks that are offering things that we couldn't have imagined before. So the possibilities are limitless. And so to cap those possibilities and try and limit them in the name of regulation and standardization obviously inhibits that growth. But ultimately, those walls crumble and fall. They always do. And when you look at the fact that your Apple Watch can potentially detect an irregular heartbeat and start to proactively, tell you that maybe something may not be right, or with a lot of caveats, right? Because of this litigious society and because of all of these privacy concerns. But when you can kind of eliminate all of that clutter and actually use it to save a life. And you think of these smart speakers, imagine the ability of someone elderly or infirmed or someone living alone to be going through a catastrophic event and be able to immediately connect through their smart speaker and have all of their vitals and all of their health particulars communicated, and their life could be saved. Isn't that more noble than trying to figure out how we can basically try and advertise 4-hour erections to more people, using
Oh,
voice.
hold on now, Joe. What was that last sentence
Hey,
again?
listen. If you are experiencing a 4-hour erection,
Here we go.
call a doctor immediately. Just don't call me.
All right. Well, one time, Joe. One time. Well, look, you're absolutely right. I think the only thing that I would add to that is, look, as long as we're all walking this earth, as long as mankind is here, there's going to be sinister intent somewhere. So I'm saying that yes, absolutely, voice is a great thing. And a law isn't going to make sinister intent go away. A guideline isn't going to make sinister intent go away. But somehow we have to make sure that we're minimizing the amount of sinister intent.
Well, moving on to our final topic of the evening. Only 2 years ago, nearly every major publisher was all in on virtual reality for both content and advertising opportunities. But now, most of those VR investments sit fallow or repurposed entirely toward lower barrier AR initiatives, which don't require you to buy additional hardware beyond usually the phone that's already in your pocket. So, Joe, I know this is a loaded question, but is VR dead or is it just resting its eyes?
It is taking a hiatus in Second Life at the moment.
For those of you who don't know,
we'll be
you
back
should
as
know.
soon as our regularly scheduled programmatic HIPAA-compliant message.
There is a coma about to happen.
This is a topic that I could probably tackle on so many levels, but I think where I'll start is that with this reminds me of the 3D TV, and it also reminds me of Google Glass. And in the case of Google Glass and the 3D TV, both of them required putting on some kind of an extra barrier or a piece of hardware between your eyes and ultimately some kind of consumption experience. VR could fit into that camp, but it won't fit into that camp because of what it brings to the table. I was initially maybe a little bit extra skeptical because a healthy degree of skepticism is always warranted with new technology. But when you start to experience, I remember taking a bunch of clients on a tour of LA, which is a real hotbed for VR. And I got to tell you, every single time I went through yet another demo, and I even remember one which was Deepak Chopra has created this incredible VR experience. I became less and less skeptical exponentially. So there's no question about the value and the benefit that VR brings to the table. The real question is coming down to distribution, cost, practicality, and figuring out how we're going to get beyond this real impediment, which is being able to have to put on a pair of goggles or glasses in order to realize this unbelievably richer, immersive environment and experience.
Every single science fiction novel I've ever read about the VR virtual worlds always ends up with people with some kind of socket surgically implanted in the base of their neck and people jacking in. I mean, whether you're talking about anything from the Neuromancer books, if you're talking about Snow Crash, if you're talking about what's the Otherworld series, if you're talking about anything, even the Matrix movies, it always comes down to we get rid of the goggles at some point and we just jack in. Until we get there, if we get there, I just can't see VR catching on in any kind of large and expansive way beyond the niche marketing opportunities and the niche content opportunities provided by theme parks.
So, Bob just confirmed that he's a nerd. I'd like to point that out.
I would like to point that out. Thank you.
Yeah, he lost me after the third word. But one of the things, and again, this was something that the source article referenced, which I think was very astute, is that we may very well find a new use case and a very powerful one, which is somewhat niche for VR, which is going to be event-based. And it's an irony of sorts, but if you think about the future of bricks and mortar, being able to now walk into a physical store, but then enjoy not only an all digital, but actually an all virtual experience. So that becomes a real powerful use case, and it absolutely gets beyond, this consumer conundrum, which is trying to get these whether it's cardboard or some kind of device, into a home. And of course, the other use case, which we're not talking about it, but it's going to be beyond real, is gaming. And so it always has been, right? And so when you start to kind of look at these use cases, maybe that will be when VR comes back, right, Bob? Coming back from this hiatus or this rest, which is being able to, instead of trying the top down and the kind of, the carpet bombing approach, it's going to be more of a find each and every use case and then really go deep and become best in class and just kind of bring them all together.
Well, I think to your point, Joe, there's a couple of things. Right now, I don't think VR for gaming, personally, I don't think it's just not good enough. But that's a separate conversation. It reminds me of the Money for Nothing. It's better than that. But you remember the Money for Nothing video?
Yeah.
Anybody listening to this, go watch that video. Dire Straits did it. But that, or what was the Michael Douglas movie with what's her name? She was married to Bruce Willis and Ashton Kutcher.
We're not going to. Yeah, this isn't IMDb. So.
Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about. So if the quality gets better now, as far as virtual reality goes, outside of gaming and things like that, I know of a couple of companies that are doing some pretty neat things, and they're doing it for heart transplants. Now, what they did and what they're using VR for is to find better ways to test the artificial heart or the new heart before it's transplanted. And they've integrated VR with 3D printing. So they basically have 3D printed a better heart because of VR. Now, I think virtual reality is like I said, it's in a coma, but I think that there are other things that are going to influence it. And imagine if these guys pull it off with artificial hearts or better ways, better tactics for heart transplants. That type of technology is going to come back to marketing and gaming because it always does. It's cyclic.
Keith, do you have anything to add to this conversation? I saw you coming off mute.
Yeah, I was going to share the healthcare example as well. I guess we as consumers are just we just have a short attention span, and so to strap into
Very
something
true.
and spend our time, that's probably why it hasn't caught on in the way that we wish it will. But something I do think people have time for is sports, and I think the ability to watch a game courtside, which very few people will do in their normal life. VR is a cool way to experience a game that way and get on the field and get all these different camera angles. So I like it in sports. I do agree, gaming right now, we're sort of just at the beginning, but I also think that could be a really interesting place. But there's some wild stuff in health, and you just mentioned it with the heart transplant stuff. Just allowing physicians to learn in a far better way, through virtual reality is pretty wild.
Well, with that, it's time for the Advil 5. But before we get to that section, and before we do that, I do want to take this opportunity. Boy, it's like I've never done this before. Let's try this again. It's time for the Advil 5. But before we do that, I want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Joe Jaffe. You can find him at thehmsbeagle.com. That's the home of his consultancy that he runs with Lynn Power. Tell us what's going on in your world, Joe. What would you like to promote?
Well, I'm not going to mention the obvious. Actually, I will.
Stop. Talk
Screw
about your
you
damn
all.
book.
No. If you
5 stars.
Yeah, in fact, that would be the plug, which is if you have purchased a copy of Built to Suck, please do give me a review on Amazon, because it is the new currency, and I really do care what you say, and I will respond to each and every one of you. And the other thing is, I will be in Belgium in May, and so if you are Belgian or even one of the neighboring countries like the Netherlands, and you'd like to hang out or find out what I'm up to, please contact me and I will give you the details.
Hashtag Joe has a book. Okay, so
he has 5. Oh, wait.
Joe has 5 books. Okay, Jonathan Sackett is next. You can find him at allscope.com. That's the agency where he is president and chief creative officer. You can also find him at mashburnenterprises.com. Tell us what's going on in your world, Jonathan. What would you like to promote?
First of all, I found the movie, and it's called Disclosure with Michael Douglas and Demi Moore.
Okay.
So if anybody even remembers that movie. But anyway, follow me on Twitter. at Jonathan Sackett. You can also follow me on at Allscope or at Jamal Mashburn. We're all intertwined. I would say, please, the panelists that Bob gets on this show and Bob himself, these are all great things, great causes. Please follow these guys, and working with them would probably behoove you. And they're much, much less annoying than I am. So consider that. And the final thing that I'll bring up is last time I was on the show I think it was a couple weeks ago, I was talking about Revolution Cannabis. And guess who is their agency of record?
That would be you.
That would be me. And these guys are great. Everything from the farms they own, it's to the distributors, to pet products, to topical solutions, and they are on top of the science like it's nobody's business. They just got back from Israel at the World Forum for Cannabis. So if you get a chance, follow those guys and look where they are now, and then wait a couple months and see what I did to them. It's going to be great.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And last but not least, Keith Stoeckler. You can find him at mktg.com. That's where he is the vice president and group director of digital at that agency. Tell us what's going on in your world, Keith. What would you like to promote?
Well, follow me on Twitter, which is Keith S. I had my full name not too long ago, and that was really painful to give out in a verbal setting. Because the last name could be difficult to some. So Keith S. on Twitter. And what I'm trying to do is, as I'm interviewing a lot of people coming out of college and trying to enter agencies or brands, is really help bridge what's being taught in colleges and universities and what the practicality of what we're doing in an agency, and helping them learn skill sets, or sharing my screen and pulling up Crimson Hexagon. So if you are a professor or a instructor at a university, I'd love to talk more about helping you build out a syllabus or take a look at what you're doing. And I know a lot of the colleges I've spoken to already, social media is a fight to get that as a class to teach, which is kind of wild to think about. So trying to help them do the best they can.
I just followed you too, Keith. Great stuff.
Appreciate it.
And I happen to be an NYU adjunct professor, so I might want to hear some more. But as for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And of course, you can find out how to advertise on the program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for the AdFail 5, a rundown of the lowest moments in advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. And first up, Lucky Lee's Restaurant in Manhattan is the latest effort by a white entrepreneur, white restaurateur, to appropriate the style of food with claims that essentially say they are doing it healthier than actual Asians would. I love this, Joe. And by relying on cultural stereotypes in their marketing. One of my favorite lines was they had a to-go window that was saying walk and roll, and they had to stop that because of, obviously it's offensive. So it's funny how everybody thinks that because Chinese restaurants are so ubiquitous that it's kind of part of American culture and you can just do them. It doesn't seem to work that way, does it, Joe?
Oh man, exactly. Sometimes there is no retort that is even remotely funny about such just dumb stupidity, and I'll bet the food tastes like crap as well.
Well, and it reminds me of Eddie Murphy. Do you remember Delirious, where he was talking about Asians making fun of us ordering Big Macs and large fries? Wow.
Well, an NBC Wall Street Journal poll found that 57% of Americans believe that social media sites do more to divide the country than to unite it, and 82% believe using it is a waste of time. This sounds right up your alley, Keith, so you answer on this one. However, like dogs to vomit, 69% of Americans use social at least once a day. So we hate ourselves, but we use it anyway, is what this comes down to, right?
That's right. That's I think why you're seeing all this rise of detoxes, and what worked for somebody may work for somebody else. But in my opinion, of course, it does more good than bad. But I can understand how people feel like it's such a negativity and a time suck. But I think the article really displays social media no differently than television or any other vice, if you will. And you can take something good of that, or you can take something bad from it. But people can and should take breaks from practically everything in their life, and social media is just one of those.
Yeah, it's definitely Joan Jett. I hate myself for loving you, isn't it?
Could be.
Well, happy day. Facebook is finally doing something to stop reminders to connect with dead friends. They got an AI for that, Jonathan. What could possibly go wrong here?
Well, see, I don't even need Facebook to talk to my dead friends. I go to the Hollywood Spirits and I find them and we talk all the time. In fact, they gave me the answers to tonight's question. So
When they get it right, you think they could tell LinkedIn? Because that would be fantastic.
maybe we can get those two to talk. We will be the catalyst that binds.
That would be great.
Now, Amazon Go, the amazing cashless store concept from Amazon, is now facing backlash, Joe, for discriminating against the poor by requiring credit cards on file. So soon, this wonderful cashless store will begin accepting cash. I got such a kick out of this just because, of course, people would be upset that you have a store that only people with the Amazon app can shop at.
This is such a stupid topic. I mean, this just made me so annoyed in a sense because actually, like, rather than come back with like a little snarky response, I actually think like that. I mean, discriminating against the poor. If you're poor, you're probably not going to an Amazon Go store in the first place. It's dumb, and it's kind of almost just caving into a bit of backlash and negativity. At the end of the day, if they really, this is such an innovative concept and it's such a different concept, and it requires a credit card and it requires an Amazon account. And if they really wanted to, what I would do is I would double down on innovation. I wouldn't start accepting cash, but I would accept other forms of payment beyond credit cards, because quite frankly, cash is becoming archaic and credit cards are going to be archaic as well. So I would double down on figuring out ways to be even more innovative. And if Amazon does care about the poor, and everyone should care about the poor, I mean, then figure out new innovative ways for people to access. For example, food that could be before that food goes spoiled, give people an opportunity to buy that food at maybe a discounted rate. So for me, this is just a very bad PR story, when in actual fact, what should be happening is we should be celebrating innovation. And ultimately, again, if we really care about the poor, let's figure out how to get, more quality food in their hands for less money and not have to worry about whether they're paying cash or credit card. Sorry about the rant.
Wow, I would like to give Joe 5 stars.
And we'll give you your own soapbox. But yeah, you make a lot of really, really, really good points. Well, last but not least, you wouldn't think that chocolate Easter ducks could be considered racist, but then Waitrose in the UK, a retailer there, put out a package of 3 chocolate ducks, Jonathan. The milk chocolate one was named Crispy, the white chocolate one was named Fluffy, and the dark chocolate one was named Ugly. I couldn't believe this is such a no-brainer. It's just like, why did you do this?
I got to tell you, man, did somebody get fired because of this? Please, I can't believe it.
Please.
This is. I'll go over there, hire me for a day, and I'll fire everybody just on their behalf. And it's reminding me. I mean, listen, I always get back to us getting too sensitive about things. Have you guys seen the rants about you can't make the OK symbol with your hand now because
because it's a white power symbol.
White power or something or whatever. That's the way I started when I heard this. And then I saw that they named the dark chocolate one Ugly. And I thought, holy God, what is going on here? I mean, do they have a legal team over there or what?
It's pathetic. And they probably doubled down by saying, well, the ugly duckling does become the swan, the white swan. Oh, wait. Oh, crap.
No, wait. Oops.
Yeah. Oh, crap.
These things happen way too often. And I mean, part of me is somewhat convinced that these things are intentional. I mean, they get press, and if you don't take an offense with it, maybe you'll be a consumer. And I think it's because we probably hold these brands, we don't hold them accountable enough. What happens to these brands after these things? Very little.
I would like to start a conspiracy theory that a lot of these, to your point, Keith, that they're doing these intentionally so that they can end up on the BeanCast Advil 5.
Well, to that point, don't you think they would have gotten more traction if they said, and the dark chocolate one we want you to name, and now you've got a whole promotion around it.
Well,
Thanks, Feaster.
Even worse.
Well,
Even
these
worse.
guys had a lot to add to the stories, but if you have something you'd like to add to this list or just want to discuss it, comment online, use the hashtag AdFel5, that's pound, AdFel, and the number 5. Well, that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit us on our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcasts listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
It's like, you know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.